Hi, you know how important it is to identify a very clear target market. But who's your non-target market? And are there parts of the target market somewhat in between, that they're still targets but they're not really special targets? How much energy do you give to each? And what on earth does inbound and outbound have to do with all of that? Let me explain. Let me start with your perfect target. This is the buyer and the type of company that you really want to sell to. They're important, they're probably senior. When they do buy, they buy big, and so they are your special targets. And it might be that you define that by perhaps 50 or 100 or 1,000, who knows, but some finite number of target companies. And maybe it's 1 or 2 or 3 key roles in those target companies. And if anybody who holds that role in that one of those companies moves, you're going to contact them. We've blogged about that previously. It's not today's conversation, but they are the special people. So you're going to walk over cut glass to get to them. Just outside of them, let me draw it up here. So we've got a little circle up here, then we've got a slightly bigger circle outside of that. There are people who work for those special few or around those special few. They're still probably in the same companies. Maybe they hold different roles, perhaps less senior, not necessarily, but often less senior. And so they're important to you. They're just not as important. And then outside of that, we've got a bigger group again, whose companies you don't know, or at least didn't think about, you didn't put them in your target list, and whose roles you may not have imagined because they've got some obscure title that even the cleverest Boolean string of titles couldn't have got you to. But it turns out, unbeknownst to you, they're really interested in the topic that you want to take to market, and they're really interested in the problem that you want to solve for that market. You could just never know of them. So here's where we need to split inbound and outbound. Of course, we'd love for the precious few, the really tight target market, to come to us. And in some businesses that is the case. For many it's not. So we're probably going to go outbound to that really sweet spot there, the bullseye of the target. We're going to go outbound and put our very best foot forward. And we might even ask sales to do that personally, do some homework, create a valid business reason for the meeting, and then outbound. The guys on the very outside, so I've gone from the very middle to the very outside, the guys on the very outside whose company names you perhaps didn't know, but whose titles you certainly didn't know, you didn't know that they were interested, but they are. For them, it's going to be inbound and probably search as your target tactic. So organic search and paid search is how you're going to bring them in. But also networking, PR, guest blogging, all of those other indirect tactics where they're certainly valid, but you don't know who's going to read them or who's going to show interest in them. So that's your inbound. And again, I've listed some of the more popular tactics for that. Speaking at conferences would be in the mix as well. In the middle, we've got people who are in secondary roles in the same target companies. And let me just quickly dance on that for a minute. If you, okay, let me use our own company. So Funnel Plan, the software I'm going to talk about at the end of the show, is really designed for one of 3 roles: head of sales, head of marketing, or CEO/divisional director. So the person to whom these both two report, head of sales, head of marketing. But there's somebody in the marketing function who might be just as valid. They might be interested, they might even have a project to pull together something for which Funnel Plan can really help. So they're a good target market, they're just not our primary target market. So I'm still going to outbound to them, but I want more volume outbounding tactics. Perhaps I'm going to use bulk email, perhaps I'm going to use telemarketing, perhaps I'm going to use direct mail. I'm going to use less direct, lower unit cost tactics, but I'm still going to outbound because they're exactly the right company that I want. They're in a role that I can imagine is important, it's just not the key role. So I really need to think about a target market in 3 buckets, and I'm going to give you a 4th in a moment. Bucket 1 is your sweet spot. These are the perfect audience. They meet your ideal client profile. They hold a role in one of the companies that you really want to target. And that's kind of where account-based marketing is heading. Bucket number 2 is the group outside of them, same companies, different roles, but valid, legitimate, aligned roles, if you like. And bucket number 3 is, I don't know the company, I don't know the role, but it turns out they're interested in the topic. And so for those, I'm going to use inbound and indirect tactics. Let me show you how we do all of that in Funnel Plan and put that into some context. So when we describe the target market, there are 2 important pieces we capture in the printed funnel plan. One is the ideal client profile. This is the characteristic or the characteristics that are true of every segment that we want to target. Then the segments themselves, the role and the type of business, how much energy we give them and how mature they are. So to the point that I was making today about having target markets and secondary markets, if you like, there's our ideal client profile. Let's scroll down to segments. Now I've actually put 4 in here. The first one is that I'm going to give some of my energy to the installed base. So this is, if you like, quite separate from my point, but I'm trying to give you some context that would be normal in a plan to have some energy going to markets other than what I'm talking about today. Now, we've got top 50 companies in wood chipping, and we're giving 30% of our energy to the heads of sales and marketing because in this company, that's who we're targeting. 30% of our energy, head of sales and marketing, the top 50 companies in the target industry. Then I've got the same industry, but I've got their direct reports as a secondary audience, and I'll give them 30%. And then I might give a further 30% to the inbounds from other businesses that I really wouldn't have identified that I wanted to target, but they're looking. Now I still want those randoms or those who knows to meet my ideal client profile, and I might filter for that. But basically, they're going to find us using the indirect tactics that I spoke about before. And that's how we play it out in the funnel plan before producing the printed output, where we get all of our strategy and all of our tactics. If you have a funnel plan already, you already know about that. And if you don't, go get one. Go here, go to funnelplan.com and get yourself a funnel plan and build not just the strategy that we've been talking about today, but the tactics and the processes that you're going to use to deliver on the objectives that you've set for the year. I hope that was valuable for you. I had a lot of fun putting it together for you. I've got lots more lined up for next week. Until then, may your funnel be full and always flowing. Our thanks this week to you for watching this week's show, to Amy Dethick for video production, to Brittany Shipton for blog production, and my name's Hugh McFarlane, and it was my absolute pleasure to have scripted and presented this week's show.